Europe's young people are living through a quiet rebellion. They're not marching on capitals or storming parliaments yet, but they're rejecting the system in a different way, by losing faith in it. Across the continent, from Lisbon to Berlin, young adults are realizing that no matter how hard they work, they can't afford the simplest thing of all, a home. For decades, the promise of Europe was simple: study hard, work hard, and life would get better. Each generation would climb a little higher than the one before. But that ladder is gone. Today, rent swallows half a paycheck, mortgages are out of reach, and for many, home ownership isn't delayed, it's impossible. This is the rent-burdened generation, the first in modern Europe to be poorer than their parents. They're living in rooms meant for students, working full-time, and still counting every euro at the end of the month. They're not lazy, not uneducated. They're trapped in an economy that treats housing as an investment, not a human need. Over the past decade, housing prices across the EU have risen by more than 50%. In Portugal, they've more than doubled. In Lisbon, the ratio between average house prices and average income is over 20 to 1. Think about that. 20 years of work for a single apartment. As my colleague Paulo Santos wrote in his article, Portugal's Vacant Home Scandal, I've seen both sides of the key. Portugal has become a warning to the rest of Europe. He described homes inherited through generations, now standing empty, caught in legal disputes or simply waiting for the right price. Over 700,000 vacant homes in a country where young families can't afford to rent. It's not just a housing issue, it's a moral one. But Portugal is not alone. Berlin, Milan, Madrid, Paris, every city tells the same story. Corporate landlords buy entire blocks. Airbnb-style rentals push out residents, and the people who grew up in these cities can no longer afford to live in them. Europe has turned into a continent of renters, living month to month, without stability or ownership. The economic roots of this crisis go deep. For years, the European Central Bank kept interest rates near zero to stimulate growth. But cheap money flowed not into wages or innovation. It flowed into property. Investors borrowed billions, bought up real estate, and watched values soar. The result was a massive, silent transfer of wealth from the young to the old, from those who rent to those who own. In Spain, left-wing movements like Podemos rose on the anger of renters. In Germany, activists launched a campaign to expropriate corporate landlords. In France, the Gilets jaunes were born out of frustration with a system that punishes those who work but can't advance. In Portugal, housing protests have filled the streets of Lisbon for months. The political consequences are becoming impossible to ignore. Disillusioned youth are drifting in opposite directions. Some embrace the left, demanding rent controls, social housing, and limits on speculation. Others turn to nationalist movements, convinced that Europe's open borders and globalized elites are to blame. Both sides share one truth. They no longer trust the system that governs them. Housing is no longer a private problem. It's the front line of Europe's identity crisis. Because when people can't afford to live where they belong, they begin to question who Europe is really built for. It doesn't have to be this way. Europe could decide that housing is infrastructure, not speculation. It could reclassify public housing investment so it doesn't count against national deficits. It could cap rent increases tied to inflation. It could create a youth housing guarantee linking affordable homes to mobility and work programs. It could finally regulate institutional investors who hoard apartments while cities crumble under demand. Europe has done harder things before. It rebuilt after war, united after division, and led on climate policy when others failed. But now it faces a quieter test: whether it can still give its young people a reason to believe that Europe is their home. Because if it can't, no currency, treaty, or summit will keep the idea of Europe alive. Every generation builds its own Europe. The one that came before built peace. The next built unity. This generation might still build fairness, if it isn't too late. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more analysis of Europe and the world. Visit westernrelations.com for in-depth articles and essays on politics, diplomacy, and the future of the West. Thank you for watching.